Hello, dear viewers. I am a global nationalist. I support nationalism in my country, India, and in all countries around the globe. Today is the second Saturday of the month, and so, as per my schedule, I will be making a video about Indian nationalism and in general. And today, the topic I wanted to talk about is secular nationalism and Hindu nationalism, and to compare both of them. Now, first of all, I want to talk about Indian nationalism as as a whole. Indian nationalism is a belief in the is a belief and an ideology and a viewpoint that India is a nation that should be protected, preserved, and uh, the Indian people should uphold it, should improve it, should make it progress, and which is what nationalism means in all countries. Now, Indian nationalism is something that uh, has always been there. There's always been an understanding that India is a civilization, that there is a commonality amongst all the people who live in the area, the Indian subcontinent. This has always been known since the Vedic period, at least. Um, Maybe even in the period of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, definitely, actually, if you consider them historical texts. Now, however, nationalism as the idea of a nation state, that idea was developed in India during the colonial era, during the British Raj, when the Indian independence movement began. This was done to uh, based on the belief that all the people in the subcontinent were being ruled by a foreign country, and uh, therefore they should unite to fight against the the government, colonial government. Now, this happened during the 19th century, and this was first done. The first instance of the Indian independence movement was the first war of India of independence in 1857, when various kingdoms in India revolted against the British. Now, these kingdoms did were not united in what their vision for India post Britain would be. They There was a lack of communication between them, a lack of planning, and this is why that they eventually were defeated. Because the revolt was so disorganized, the British defeated it but they still suffered heavy losses from it, and this caused uh, the British government to take over the governance of India from the East India Company, and Queen Victoria started ruling India directly. Now, during independence movement continued until 1947, as you already know. Now, during this movement, there was slowly and carefully, and sometimes in sudden bursts of energy, an idea of India as a nation started growing. It was based on uh, for example, on now, but during the independence movement, there were two different strands of ideological strands which wanted to determine what the Indian nation state would be. One was the secular uh, nationalism, and one was Hindu nationalism. Secular nationalism is the idea that should be a secular nation state, and that um, India should not be identified according to any specific religion, and that the Indian government should not involve itself in religious matters. However, that was the original idea of secularism, because that is how secularism was practiced in the rest of the world at that time, which was at that time only Western countries. However, once independence was got by India, not given. India got independence. Um, Secularism in India developed its own meaning. It became known to mean that the state would be equidistant from all religions. It would treat all religions equally. However, that it would be involved in religious activities, but it would involve itself equally with all religions. That's what secularism as an ideology became in India. This was during the uh, post colonial era, and especially during Indira Gandhi's prime ministership, when she introduced the amendment to the constitution where the preamble was amended, and uh, it was the word secular was introduced. And the Supreme Court, in several cases, held that the amendment was uh, constitutional, and that India indeed has always been a secular country. In SR Bommai versus Union of India, the Supreme Court held that the Indian state is completely secular, actually favored the or Western definition of secularism, that Indian state should not engage in any religious activity. And in fact, it said that any state government that does practices non-secular policies should be removed under Article 356 by the central government. And but that's not a prominent judicial position now. But at that time, the judgment was made. That's what they held. But and that has, I think, been the ideal state that Indian secularists want. However, they've not been able to fulfill that because of mainly because of politics. For example, uh, in the 1950s, legislation was passed to uh, codify Hindu personal laws into secular terms. That Hindus' family law, which governs marriage, um, adoption, succession, would not be governed by their own religious texts, but by laws passed by the government, specifically the Hindu Marriage Act of 1956, the Hindu Adoption Act, etc. This was opposed by several Hindu organizations, including uh, Hindus in Congress, Hindu traditionalists. However, the act was still passed, and this angered Hindus because the government at that time did not attempt to pass legislation relating to laws on Indian Christians and Indian Muslims, and who were allowed to continue their governing their family matters according to their religious laws. This was seen to be unfair by Hindu nationalist groups at that time. Then, during the 1980s, the famous Shah Bano case happened where Shah Bano was divorced by her husband and by talak e bidat, also known as triple talak, where a Muslim husband says the word talak three times, either through any means, verbal or communication, and nowadays can be done through text. Uh, yeah, and so this can be done without providing any maintenance to the wife and without any chance for her to oppose the divorce. And the Supreme Court held that triple talaq was unconstitutional. And uh, however, the Rajiv Gandhi government at that time passed an amendment in, yes, the government passed an act, Muslim um, the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986, in which it was stated that a Muslim woman could claim maintenance from her husband during the period of iddat, which is 90 days post the divorce of a woman, uh, according to Islamic law. And so this, however, was not some act that revoked Section 125 of the CRPC, which mandates that any husband has to pay maintenance to his divorced wife, irrespective of what religion he follows. But it gave Muslim husbands an other option to choose. So it did not nullify or revoke the judgment of the High Supreme Court, because that would be unconstitutional. But at least not in letter, but in spirit, it somewhat did, and has become a major controversy ever since, because it was seen as the Congress favoring Muslims, appeasing Muslims, which angered the Hindu right, because this was being done repeatedly by a Congress. For example, they had uh, passed a act in the 50s which allowed them to take over Hindu religious institutions and to use the funds received from such institutions for religious, non Hindu activities. And also, as the years have gone by, especially during the UPA government, both UPA 1 and 2, Muslims were given reservations in India, and were schemes were made for Muslims, and all this really angered the Hindu right of India, and so they started feeling that secularism that's practiced by the Indian state, at least by Congress, is not actually secularism, but it's pseudo secularism. It's not equal treatment of all religions. It's uh, favoritism towards Islam and Christianity also. Hindu nationalists also believe that, rightly, that the Indian government has been appeasing towards the Christian community, which is why they often allow Christians to engage in uh, Christian missionaries to engage in conversions which are fraudulent and dishonest. Why they allow Christian religious institutions and educational institutions to discriminate against non Christians. And this became part of some way the culture of India, where it was okay to criticize and even mock and insult Hindus, but it was not okay to criticize, mock, or insult Muslims or Christians. And yeah, that's what happened to Indian secularism. And this brings me to the second uh, version of nationalism that was developed in the Indian independence movement, which is Hindu nationalism. This movement began in, well, even the movement was started by the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. From here on, I'll refer to it as the RSS, which is a which is a self-volunteer service organization developed in the 1920s, started in the 1920s, which supports the idea that India is a Hindu nation and believes that secularism as practiced in India must end. Even from their inception, they believed that secularism was unfair to Hindus. Specifically, Veer Savarkar taught that he was the chief proponent of Hinduism, Hindu nationalism, which he named as Hindutva, which means Hinduness. He believed that India was always a Hindu nation and that the state must promote and protect Hinduism in order to protect India. He believed that in order to be a citizen of India, people had to view their uh, India as not only their motherland, or Matrabhumi, but also as their religious land, their holy land, the Punya Bhumi. Um, he therefore believed that Muslims and Christians could not be considered as Indian citizens because they don't think of India as their religious land, their holy land. They think that Jerusalem or Mecca are their religious lands, and he this thinking has been changed by RSS. RSS now says that Hindus and Muslims, that Muslims and Christians are also actually, in fact, are also Indians, but they must recognize their Hindu roots, the Hindu culture that surrounds them, and that they should stop trying to convert other non-Muslims and non-Christians to their religion and should allow and respect all religions in India, which is what Hinduism practices and preaches. And right now, Hindu nationalism is the dominant ideology ever since 2014 when um, the BJP got a majority in the 2014 general elections and Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister of India. And since then, the BJP has won successive state government elections and has been re-elected to parliament in 2019. And the ideology of Hindu nationalism has spread throughout India. Many people have started supporting it. The RSS has become more prominent, more outspoken, and which is not what they were originally. Originally, they wanted their work to speak for themselves and they wouldn't advertise themselves. But because they were constantly being misrepresented by their opponents, the Sioux secularists, the jihadists, and Christian missionaries. They have started to speak for themselves, although not to advertise, simply to communicate with others, with the outside world, to let others understand what they are and what they do. Now, the question is that can both these ideologies be united or merged anyway? I think that it is possible, but it would be difficult. Now, and also I think it's needed because both ideologies have some validity. For example, um, Hindu Hindutva, which says that India is a Hindu nation, that it has always been a Hindu nation, is correct. Because if you were to give an identity to India, a religious identity, it can only be Hindu. Although technically, when I use the word Hindu, I'm referring to Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains because according to Hindu personal laws passed by the government, that they are also Hindus. And also because their religions are actually outgrowths from Hinduism. And at that time, originally Hinduism was simply the term given for the various traditions and philosophies and practices and, that were done throughout the Indian subcontinent by the native people. And this is a name given by the British, who used it to differentiate Hindus from Muslims, who they viewed as outsiders to India, and which is incorrect because Muslims are descendants of Hindus who were forcibly converted to Islam before others disagreed. This is or get upset. This is proven through history, and yeah, there is enough proof that forcible and violent conversions were done against Hindus, which is how Islam spread mainly in India. Now, what else? So I think that you should call India a dharmic nation, a dharma rashtra. Now, this is also means that we should forget that. Uh, so Hindu nationalism is correct on that, on what the basic uh, identity of India is, which is dharma, the Sanatana dharma, and I think that this is the basis on which Indian nationalism grows, because even non-dharmic religions in India have imbibed the values and beliefs of dharma from the other religions, and also their um, their idea that India has always been a nation, I think is not entirely true. I think India has been a civilization, India, and with several nations, with like different several communities, not nations but communities, and so it should be better to call India a Dharma civilization state. So, but I agree with them that India has always been a single cultural entity, that which is not what secularists believe. Secularists claim that India was only created after the British came and colonized India. This is also the view that Christian missionaries and jihadists have, to delegitimize India as a nation and to make it, to justify their attacks, both physical and non-physical, against India. However, the secularists also have some valid points. For example, their idea that their belief, the original belief of secularism, that the state should not engage in religious activities, is something I support, because this was actually also practiced by India throughout history, which is, for example, the Kshatriyas were never engaged in religious affairs, which is what the Brahmins were doing. And so I think if you, what secularism, if it's properly implemented, it's simply the same thing as that's always been done in India. And I also agree that all religions should be treated equally, that the government should not uh, discriminate against any religious means. And yeah, but so I want India to be a nation which is Dharma, which is a nation for dharmic citizens, dharmic people, and dharmic religions for them, and that, for example, it will allow anybody who believes in any other dharmic religions to apply for citizenship in India from anywhere in the world. But as far as Muslims and Islam and Christianity, only um, those Muslims and Christians from outside India can become citizens if they accept certain principles of dharmic religions, such as the equality of all religions and the respect for all religions, and to not convert anyone. If they agree to that, then I think they can be given citizenship. If not, then they shouldn't. And I think that this is something that the government in such a nation should enforce on Indian Muslims and Christians as well, that they should not support them or allow them to convert others. That should be done away with. And at least, yeah, the at least fraudulent, specifically fraudulent conversions, and at least they can, if anyone voluntarily, honestly wants to change their own religion, then I think they should be allowed to, as for their freedom of conscience under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. And yeah, so that's what I think. I think in now, being a Hindu nation does not mean that India will not be able to respect other religions, because Hinduism in itself, it believes in the equality of all religions. So, and yeah, and Christians and Muslims will be equal citizens. Yeah, there will be no discrimination. So yeah, that's what I think will should be done to unite both ideologies. And I hope, and I think that this might be able to uh, bring an end to the debate and allow the country and the subcontinent as a whole to move forward. And if you want to watch my other videos in this playlist, click here. If you want to watch my previous video, click here. Thank you for watching. Vande Mataram.